She leaned close to her secret lover, her voice trembling with a mix of excitement and fear. "I'm carrying your child," she confessed, her smile wicked. "But my husband, he'll raise the baby as his own." She thought her little secret was safe. What she didn't know was that her hubby was standing in the shadows, hearing every word, and what he did next would change all their lives forever. Daniel Whitmore's life had always been about balance. As an architect in his late 30s, he built skyscrapers that touched the sky, yet his personal foundation was shaky. He adored his wife, Clara, who was 34, elegant, and magnetic in ways that drew people to her. But behind their polished suburban home, there was an emptiness neither of them admitted out loud. For 7 years of marriage, they had battled heartbreak, fertility treatments, miscarriages, endless doctor visits. Each time hope rose, it was crushed by another hospital hallway. Daniel had watched Clara cry herself to sleep, her sobs muffled against a pillow while he sat awake, staring at the ceiling, silently blaming himself. So when Clara called him one evening to the kitchen, her hands trembling as she held out a small white stick, Daniel felt his chest tighten. He saw the faint double lines. His throat burned. "You're pregnant," he whispered, his voice breaking. Clara nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It finally happened, Daniel. We're going to be parents." Daniel pulled her into his arms, nearly lifting her off the ground. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her hands. For once, all the sacrifices, late nights at the office, endless prayers whispered in silence, felt worth it. This was the miracle they had begged for. He called his mother that night, his voice shaking as he told her she would finally be a grandmother. He spent the following weekend sketching nursery designs on his drafting table, imagining a crib by the window, shelves of storybooks, a rocking chair where Clara would sing lullabies. But while Daniel's heart swelled, Clara's smile didn't always reach her eyes. When she looked in the mirror, touching her flat stomach, the truth weighed heavy. The child growing inside her wasn't Daniel's. It belonged to Marcus Hale, Daniel's business partner, his confidant, his best friend since college. Marcus had been the one to comfort Clara during Daniel's long nights at work. At first, it was innocent, shared glasses of wine, easy laughter. But loneliness had grown teeth, and Clara had allowed herself to be consumed. One night of weakness spiraled into months of secret passion. And then, the pregnancy test. Instead of dread, Clara convinced herself it was perfect. Daniel had longed for a baby, he would raise the child with devotion, never suspecting the truth. Marcus, too ambitious to be tied down, had no interest in fatherhood. Clara believed she had outsmarted fate. But she underestimated Daniel's attentiveness. She noticed how he lingered in the doorway longer than usual, how he watched her with a depth that was more searching than joyful. Daniel had spent his life reading blueprints, detecting flaws invisible to the untrained eye. He knew when something didn't align. And though he clung to hope, a faint unease had already begun to stir in him. For now, though, Daniel allowed himself to dream, unaware that within weeks, his miracle would twist into betrayal sharp enough to break him. The Whitmore house sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees, the kind of neighborhood where neighbors waved during morning jogs and kids rode bikes until dusk. To outsiders, Daniel and Clara were the perfect couple, handsome, successful, finally expecting a child after years of struggle. But perfection has cracks that only those inside the walls can see. On a humid Thursday evening, Daniel finished work earlier than usual. His construction site inspection wrapped up 2 hours ahead of schedule, and for once, he decided not to call Clara. He wanted to surprise her, maybe pick up her favorite Thai food, bring flowers, and spend a rare quiet dinner together. As he turned into the driveway, Daniel noticed another car parked discreetly near the back fence. His brows furrowed. It wasn't unfamiliar, he had seen Marcus's black Audi 100 times. He brushed it off at first, Marcus was his business partner, after all. Perhaps they were going over some numbers. Still, something gnawed at him. He unlocked the door silently, stepping inside with his briefcase. The house was quiet, save for faint laughter drifting from the patio. Clara's laugh. He hadn't heard it so free, so unguarded, in months. A man's voice followed, low, confident, intimate. Marcus. Daniel's pulse raced. He set his briefcase down carefully, shoes soft against the hardwood as he approached the sliding glass door. From the shadows of the kitchen, he saw them, Clara and Marcus sitting close on the patio chairs, wine glasses half full, their knees almost touching. Then Clara leaned forward, her voice hushed but distinct in the summer air. "I'm pregnant for you," she said, her words slicing like glass. "But my husband will raise the child. He'll never know." Daniel's world tilted. The air left his lungs. For a moment, he thought he had misheard, that his mind had conjured a nightmare. But Marcus's smirk confirmed it, the way he reached out to squeeze Clara's hand. "You're brilliant," Marcus replied. "Let him play daddy while we live free." Daniel's knees nearly buckled. Every late night, every overtime hour, every ounce of hope he had poured into fatherhood, it wasn't just a lie, it was mockery. His wife and his best friend, conspiring in his own home. He could have stormed out, could have hurled accusations and ended it then and there. But Daniel's instincts, honed from years of careful planning in architecture, whispered restraint. Buildings weren't demolished in anger, they were dismantled with strategy. Silently, he backed away from the door. His face burned, fists trembling, but his mind sharpened. Clara thought him naive. Marcus thought him blind. They believed the lie would survive because Daniel was too trusting to question it. But that night, Daniel decided to become what they never expected, patient, calculating, dangerous in his silence. As he walked out of the house unnoticed, the flowers he had bought for Clara crumpled in his hand. Daniel knew one thing with certainty, he would not confront them tonight. He would let them weave their perfect web of deceit. And when the time came, he would burn it down with evidence no one could deny. That night, Daniel lay awake in their king-sized bed while Clara slept soundly beside him. Her hand rested on her stomach, a serene smile curving her lips. To her, the world was unfolding exactly as she planned, her husband devoted, her lover excited, and her secret protected. Daniel stared at the ceiling, his mind replaying every word he'd overheard. "I'm pregnant for you, my husband will raise the child." The cruelty of it echoed in his chest. But beneath the heartbreak, a sharper instinct rose, survival. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a trap that could rob him of his dignity, his wealth, even his future. He turned slightly, watching Clara's face in the soft moonlight. For years, he had believed she was his partner, his comfort after long workdays. Now, every look, every laugh, every touch felt rehearsed. She had played him while planning a life with another man. The next morning, Daniel began his quiet war. He bought a small voice recorder and tucked it into the drawer near the patio door. Whenever Clara and Marcus met there, their conversations became evidence. He checked her phone when she left it unattended, forwarding suspicious messages to a secret email. He even placed a tracker in Marcus's car, justifying the expense with a cold logic. Architects inspected every angle before construction, why should his revenge be built on anything less than perfect blueprints? At work, Daniel wore his mask well. He shook Marcus's hand during meetings, forced a smile as they reviewed projects, and let his so-called friend believe nothing had changed. The deception cut him deeply, but it also gave him leverage. Each handshake felt like a promise of reckoning. Meanwhile, Clara grew bolder. She walked with her hand over her belly, playing the glowing expectant mother, while secretly texting Marcus under the table. At night, she told Daniel, "You'll make the best father." Her words were daggers, but Daniel swallowed them, knowing each lie she spoke would soon testify against her. His mother, Evelyn Whitmore, noticed his silence during Sunday dinners. "You're distracted, Daniel," she said softly, pouring tea. "Is Clara doing all right with the pregnancy?" Daniel forced a smile. "She's fine, Mom. just tired. But Evelyn had raised him alone after his father abandoned them. She knew the face of a man wrestling with secrets. She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "Whatever it is, don't let anyone make you small in your own home." Those words anchored him. Daniel wasn't small. He was gathering strength, piece by piece, document by document. By the end of 2 weeks, his folder was thick with evidence, transcribed texts, audio files, photos of Clara slipping into Marcus's car when she claimed to be at prenatal appointments. Each page was another nail in the coffin of their lies. Daniel closed the folder one night and whispered to himself, "Not yet." Because timing was everything. If he struck too soon, they'd twist the narrative. But if he waited, he could end them both in one public blow. Clara Whitmore had always been admired. Her poise, her beauty, her effortless way of making a room pay attention, it had been her greatest weapon long before she married Daniel. In their suburban neighborhood, she wore her new pregnancy like a crown. Neighbors stopped her at the grocery store, hands brushing her arm as they gushed, "Congratulations, Clara. Daniel must be over the moon." She would beam, letting them see the glow, while inside she laughed at how perfectly everything was unfolding. Her husband, the ever-devoted Daniel, was convinced he was finally going to be a father. Marcus, her lover, had promised to keep their affair hidden, enjoying the thrill without the burden. And Clara? She was standing in both worlds, protected by Daniel's stability while still tasting Marcus's fire. At dinner parties, Clara leaned into Daniel's shoulder, bragging about his latest project. "He's designing a museum downtown," she said, her voice warm and proud. "I can't imagine a better role model for our child." Her friends clapped politely, their admiration thick in the air. Clara thrived on it, the perfect wife with the perfect life. Daniel, sitting beside her, played his role well. He smiled, raised his glass, and said nothing of the nights he sat replaying her whispered confession. The evidence folder in his study grew heavier with each passing week, but his face gave nothing away. His silence was Clara's blind spot. Sometimes, late at night, she would test him. She'd curl against him in bed, whispering, "You've always wanted this, haven't you? To be a father?" Daniel would stroke her hair and murmur, "More than anything." She mistook his calm for blindness. Marcus, too, fed her arrogance. In their stolen hours together, he smirked as he kissed her neck and said, "He doesn't suspect a thing, does he?" Clara shook her head with a sly smile. "Daniel worships me. He'd never imagine." But cracks began to show. Evelyn, Daniel's mother, visited one afternoon with a basket of knitted baby clothes. Clara received her with polite warmth, but Evelyn's sharp eyes missed nothing. She noticed the way Clara looked at her phone too often, the way her smiles lacked depth. Later that evening, Evelyn pulled Daniel aside in the hallway. "She's hiding something," Evelyn whispered. "I don't know what, but I feel it." Daniel met his mother's gaze, steady and unreadable. "I know, Mom." Evelyn's breath caught, but Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "Trust me." "Not yet." The knowledge unsettled her, but she saw a fire in her son's eyes that reassured her. He wasn't broken, he was planning. Meanwhile, Clara's confidence grew reckless. She began to slip up in small ways, unexplained absences, perfume lingering when she returned late, a laugh on the phone she couldn't quite mask. But she always covered with one phrase, "I was at a doctor's appointment." Daniel nodded, jotting down the date in his secret log. In her mind, the lie was airtight. In Daniel's, the countdown had already begun. Marcus Hale was the kind of man who thrived on charm. At 39, with salt and pepper hair and a tailored wardrobe, he moved through the world with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. To Daniel, he was more than a business partner, he was the friend who had stood beside him since college, the best man at his wedding, the uncle figure everyone assumed would one day spoil Daniel's children. But behind that easy smile was a man who craved power more than loyalty. To Marcus, Clara was not love, she was a trophy. She was Daniel's wife, and possessing her gave Marcus a thrill that success in business never could. The fact that she was pregnant with his child only deepened the intoxication. At work, Marcus played his role flawlessly. In meetings, he clapped Daniel on the back, laughing about deadlines and contracts. "You'll be too busy changing diapers soon," he joked in front of staff, drawing chuckles. Daniel forced a grin, his jaw tightening beneath the mask. What no one in the boardroom knew was that Marcus spent his evenings sipping wine with Clara on Daniel's patio. He fed her reassurances, "Don't worry, baby. He'll raise our child like it's his. He'll never see it coming." Clara would giggle, leaning into him, convinced the game was under her control. Yet Marcus had his own duplicity. While Clara believed she was the only one who understood his ambitions, Marcus saw her as a temporary amusement. He had no plans of leaving his bachelor lifestyle behind. A child meant nothing to him. The arrangement was convenient. Clara got her stability, Daniel got his illusion, and Marcus got his thrill. Daniel, meanwhile, was no longer naive. Every text Marcus sent to Clara was mirrored in Daniel's hidden email. Every rendezvous was documented with photos and time stamps. He studied Marcus like an architect studying a structure for weak points. The cracks became clearer when Marcus slipped during a late-night dinner meeting. They were reviewing blueprints in Daniel's office when Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his lips twitching with a private smile before he quickly flipped it over. "Girlfriend?" Daniel asked casually, hiding the razor edge in his tone. Marcus chuckled, waving it off. "You know me, Danny. Can't tie me down." Daniel nodded, his pen scratching notes across the blueprint. "No strings, huh?" Marcus grinned. "Exactly. Just the way I like it." That single exchange told Daniel everything. Marcus wasn't in this for Clara, not really. Which meant, when the time came, Marcus would be the first to fold under pressure. The lover who boasted about freedom had no interest in taking responsibility. Daniel would use that cowardice like a lever, prying open the lies until they collapsed. For now, though, Marcus enjoyed his double life. At work, the devoted friend. In secret, the betrayer. And in his arrogance, he never noticed that the man he mocked in private was already tightening the noose with every recorded word. Evelyn Whitmore had learned long ago that silence spoke louder than words. At 63, her silver hair was cropped neatly, her back still straight from decades of running her own bakery after her husband abandoned her and Daniel. She had raised her son to be honest, hardworking, and loyal, values that Daniel carried like armor. But when Evelyn visited her son and daughter-in-law one crisp Sunday afternoon, she noticed cracks in that armor. Clara greeted her at the door with exaggerated warmth, one hand draped over her stomach. "Evelyn. Come in. Daniel's just finishing up some sketches." She led her mother-in-law into the living room, her tone sugary sweet. Evelyn smiled politely, but her eyes caught the details others missed, the faint perfume that wasn't Daniel's taste, the quick glance Clara gave her phone on the coffee table, the way her smile vanished the second she turned her head. "Tea?" Clara asked, already pouring without waiting for an answer. Evelyn nodded, sitting down on the couch. As Clara fussed in the kitchen, Evelyn studied the framed photographs on the mantel, wedding day, vacations, posed smiles that once carried sincerity. But Evelyn had seen this before, the shift in tone, the performance of happiness, the hidden shadows behind a woman's eyes. She had lived it when her own husband slipped away into another woman's arms. When Daniel finally joined them, Evelyn studied his face. He kissed her cheek, polite but subdued, and sat quietly as Clara carried in a tray of biscuits. His eyes didn't linger on his wife the way they used to. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're quiet these days, Danny," Evelyn said softly, sipping her tea. "Something on your mind?" Daniel glanced at Clara, who busied herself with arranging biscuits, and then back at his mother. His lips curved faintly. Work's been heavy. That's all. Evelyn didn't press, but she recognized the look. Her son wasn't broken. He was carrying something, storing it, waiting. She thought of all the nights she had sat alone after her husband's betrayal, wishing she'd acted sooner, wishing she had seen the signs. She wouldn't make that mistake again. Later, as Clara excused herself to take a phone call outside, Evelyn leaned closer to her son. "She's hiding something," she whispered. "I can feel it." Daniel's gaze locked with hers. Calm. Steady. Controlled. "I know, Mom." The simplicity of the words chilled her. He wasn't guessing, he was certain. Evelyn's chest tightened. "Then why?" "Not yet," Daniel cut in gently, placing a hand over hers. His voice carried the firmness of a man who had made a choice. "Trust me. I'll handle it." Evelyn nodded slowly, her throat thick. She wanted to protect him, to shield him from the storm she knew was coming. But there was something in Daniel's eyes she hadn't seen since he was a boy. The cold determination of someone who had been wounded and was now sharpening that pain into a weapon. As Clara returned, her laughter forced and bright, Evelyn made herself smile. But inside, she whispered a prayer. Not for Clara. Not for Marcus. For her son. Because she knew when Daniel's silence broke, it would not be with forgiveness. It would be with fire. The Whitmores' 10th wedding anniversary was approaching, and Clara seized it as an opportunity to reinforce her performance as the perfect wife. She wanted everyone to see her glowing, radiant, and cherished by her husband. It wasn't just about appearances, it was about control. If the world believed their marriage was unshakable, then Daniel would remain trapped in the role of the loyal husband, raising a child he didn't know wasn't his. She booked a lavish dinner party at one of the city's finest restaurants, a place with glittering chandeliers and live piano music. She fussed over invitations, sending them to family, close friends, and of course, Marcus, because what better thrill than flaunting her victory under Daniel's nose. One evening, she leaned across the couch, resting her head on Daniel's shoulder as she circled a date in the planner. 10 years, Daniel, she said softly. We should celebrate properly. Everyone will be there to see how happy we are. Daniel smiled faintly, his eyes unreadable. You're right. It should be a night to remember. His tone carried no malice, but inside, Daniel had already chosen this moment as the stage for his reckoning. For weeks, he had been gathering more than evidence, he had been preparing a performance of his own. He knew Clara thrived on admiration, Marcus on arrogance. What better way to break them than in the very spotlight they sought? At the office, Daniel continued his mask of normalcy. He shook Marcus's hand after meetings, even invited him to lunch, listening as Marcus bragged about a new investment. All the while, Daniel's folder grew thicker. A private investigator he had quietly hired delivered crisp photos, Marcus and Clara in a hotel lobby, their hands entwined. Audio clips of Clara whispering over the phone, "He'll never know. You and I will always have this." At night, Daniel would sit at his desk, listening to those words on repeat, the rage simmering, then cooling into steel. Timing mattered. Strategy mattered. If he lashed out in private, Clara would manipulate, Marcus would deny, and somehow Daniel would be painted the villain. But in public, under chandeliers and toasts, they wouldn't escape. Evelyn, sensing the undercurrent, pulled Daniel aside one afternoon. "Danny, you're planning something." He met her gaze, steady as stone. "She wants to celebrate lies, Mom. I'll give her a celebration she'll never forget." Evelyn's lips pressed thin, torn between pride and fear. "Just don't lose yourself in the fire." Daniel kissed her cheek, his voice low. "I won't. I know exactly who I am now." Meanwhile, Clara stood before her mirror, rehearsing her radiant smile, placing her hand over her stomach for effect. She imagined the clinking glasses, the admiring glances, the way Marcus would wink at her across the table while Daniel raised a toast, oblivious. The image thrilled her. But in her vanity, Clara never noticed the shadow in Daniel's eyes each time he looked at her. A shadow not of weakness, but of precision. For Daniel, the anniversary wasn't just a dinner. It was the stage where masks would shatter, and truth would roar louder than any applause. The restaurant sparkled that evening like a jewel box. Crystal chandeliers dripped golden light onto polished mahogany tables, and a grand piano hummed softly in the background. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved with elegance, pouring wine into long-stemmed glasses. Clara stood at the entrance in a sapphire silk dress that hugged her figure, her hand resting conspicuously over her stomach. She radiated triumph, basking in the admiring looks of guests who greeted her. "Clara, you're glowing," one friend exclaimed, squeezing her arm. "I owe it all to Daniel," Clara replied sweetly, glancing at her husband with a smile that could have fooled anyone. Daniel, in a sharp tailored suit, kissed her cheek. His smile was measured, calm, and impenetrable. He shook hands, thanked guests for coming, and played the gracious host. Yet beneath his polished exterior, he felt the weight of the folder tucked discreetly inside his leather briefcase, hidden under their table. Marcus arrived fashionably late, as always, in a charcoal blazer with no tie, exuding effortless charm. He embraced Daniel warmly, too warmly, and kissed Clara's cheek with the brazenness of a man convinced of his own invisibility. Clara's eyes sparkled at him for a fleeting second before she turned back to her guests. Evelyn watched all of it with hawk-like precision. She sat quietly near the head of the table, her hands folded in her lap, her sharp eyes darting between the players of this dangerous game. She had seen storms brew before, but never one this tightly coiled. Dinner began with laughter and light conversation. Plates of seared salmon and roasted duck were served, champagne flutes clinked, and the soft music filled pauses. Clara leaned into Daniel, her voice pitched for the table to hear. 10 years, darling. Can you believe it? And soon, we'll be 3. Gasps of admiration circled. A baby. Finally, one aunt exclaimed, dabbing her eyes. Daniel, you must be so proud. Daniel lifted his glass, smiling faintly. Proud doesn't begin to cover it. His voice was smooth, steady, but his mother caught the flicker in his eyes. She pressed her napkin tighter in her lap, knowing the storm was close. Marcus raised his own glass. To Daniel and Clara. 10 years strong. His smirk was subtle, but Daniel saw it. A private mockery hiding behind a public toast. Clara placed her hand on Daniel's, squeezing it for show. We're blessed, truly, she said, her smile luminous. The room glowed with admiration, but beneath the surface, Daniel felt the sharp edges of betrayal press harder against his chest. Every laugh, every toast, every false smile was a knife twisted deeper. Yet he waited. Timing was everything. The world saw a husband adoring his wife, a wife basking in affection, and a friend celebrating their bond. None of them knew that by the time dessert was served, those masks would be torn away. Daniel's fingers brushed the handle of his briefcase beneath the table. The evidence inside pulsed like a heartbeat, waiting. He sipped his champagne slowly, his face unreadable, his silence louder than the piano's song. The piano melody swelled as waiters cleared plates and replaced them with delicate slices of tiramisu and bowls of fresh fruit. Conversation buzzed around the long table, old friends reminisced, Clara's relatives praised her glow, and Marcus leaned back in his chair, sipping wine like a man utterly at ease. Clara beamed, soaking in every compliment. Her hand drifted over her stomach again, a silent reminder to the room that she carried the long-awaited Whitmore air. She turned to Daniel, her voice sweet and practiced. Darling, do you want to make the toast? Daniel dabbed his lips with a napkin, his movements deliberate. He rose slowly, lifting his champagne flute. The chatter dimmed as all eyes turned to him. He smiled, calm, almost serene, and for a moment, he looked every bit the proud husband. To 10 years, he began, his voice steady. 10 years of building, of sacrifice, of faith. Marriage is like architecture. You lay a foundation, brick by brick, hoping it will stand against storms. Guests murmured their agreement, glasses raised in anticipation. Clara squeezed his arm, glowing at what she thought was devotion. Daniel's smile thinned. But what happens when you discover cracks in the foundation? What happens when you find termites eating away at the wood you thought was solid? Confused glances rippled through the table. Clara's smile faltered, just slightly. Marcus shifted in his chair. Daniel set his glass down and reached for the leather briefcase at his feet. With measured precision, he placed it on the table and unlatched it. From inside, he drew a thick manila envelope. He slid it across the table until it stopped directly in front of Clara. "Why don't you open it, my love?" he said softly. The room grew still. Clara's hand hesitated as she reached for the envelope. She glanced at him, her pulse quickening, but his eyes gave nothing away. She pulled the flap open and froze as photographs spilled out, images of her and Marcus in hotel lobbies, on patios, even kissing in the car parked discreetly by the fence. A collective gasp rose around the table. Forks clattered against plates. Evelyn closed her eyes, her hand trembling against her chest. Clara's face drained of color. "Daniel." Daniel's voice cut through hers, low and razor-sharp. "Read them." She fumbled, pulling out the printed text messages. Her own words stared back at her, captured in ink. "I'm pregnant for you. Hubby will raise the child." The silence was suffocating. Marcus's wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. Daniel turned his gaze on his so-called friend. "You thought I wouldn't hear? You thought my life was a game you could play in secret?" His voice never rose, but the control in it was more terrifying than a shout. Around them, whispers erupted. Guests covered their mouths, some staring in disbelief, others in disgust. Clara's hands shook, the evidence trembling in her grasp. Daniel straightened his suit jacket. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of 10 years. Instead, it will be remembered as the night your lies collapsed under their own weight. And with that, he sat back down, his face calm, while the world around Clara and Marcus cracked wide open. The restaurant erupted into chaos. Clara's fingers fumbled with the photos, her eyes darting wildly across the faces staring at her. Guests whispered furiously, hands covering mouths, some in disbelief, others in disgust. Clara's aunt, sitting closest, gasped aloud. "Clara, how could you?" Clara's lips trembled. She reached for Daniel's arm, her voice cracking. "Daniel, please, let's talk about this privately." But Daniel calmly pulled his arm away. His composure only amplified her humiliation. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous," he barked. "Fabricated. Daniel, you're better than this." Daniel's hand slid another item from the envelope, a USB stick. He set it gently on the table, then clicked a small portable speaker he had brought along. The patio recording filled the restaurant in crisp detail. Clara's voice, hushed but unmistakable, "I'm pregnant for you. But my husband will raise the child. He'll never know." The room froze. Marcus's face drained of blood. Clara's body stiffened, as though struck by lightning. The recording continued, Marcus's smug chuckle echoing through the hall. "You're brilliant. Let him play daddy while we live free." The words hung heavy in the silence. Glasses trembled in hands. Evelyn opened her eyes, her lips pressed thin, her gaze fixed coldly on Clara. Clara lunged for the speaker, but Daniel intercepted her hand with chilling calm. "Sit down," he said firmly. She did, trembling. Marcus tried again, his voice sharp. "You don't know what you're doing, Daniel. You'll destroy your reputation too." Handle this quietly, like men. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his tone cutting. Reputation. You stole my wife, my trust, my fatherhood. You mocked me in my own home. Tonight, Marcus, I'm not the one destroyed. You are. Gasps rippled around the table. A cousin muttered, God have mercy. Another guest stood, shaking his head. I can't believe this. Clara's tears spilled freely now. Daniel, please, she whispered. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But we can fix this. You don't have to. Daniel's gaze pinned her where she sat. You plotted to let me raise another man's child. You thought me blind, stupid, desperate. What part of that do you imagine can be fixed? The weight of his words crushed her. She slumped in her chair, sobs racking her chest as whispers swelled around the room like fire through dry grass. Marcus straightened his jacket, trying to salvage dignity. I don't have to sit here for this spectacle, he snapped, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He stormed toward the exit, the eyes of every guest boring into his back. Daniel didn't watch him go. He kept his eyes fixed on Clara, who sat shattered under the weight of her own collapse. The woman who once thrived on admiration now drowned in disgrace, every eye in the room a mirror of judgment. Daniel lifted his glass once more, calm as stone. To 10 years, he said softly, his voice laced with steel. To lies that could not last. He drank. The room remained silent, the sound of his glass meeting the table like the final nail in a coffin. The restaurant emptied in uneasy silence. Guests slipped out one by one, their murmurs trailing behind them like smoke. Some shook their heads in pity for Daniel, others in scorn for Clara. A few wouldn't even look her in the eye as they passed. By the time the chandeliers dimmed for closing, only 3 people remained at the long table, Daniel, Clara, and Evelyn. Clara sat hunched, her once flawless dress wrinkled, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Her hand hovered over her stomach as though clinging to the only anchor left. Daniel, she whispered hoarsely, please, don't do this. Think of the baby. He doesn't deserve this. Daniel's jaw clenched. He reached into his briefcase again, pulling out a second envelope, this one thinner, sharper. He slid it across the table toward her. Clara's hands shook as she opened it, her heart plunging when she saw the bold words at the top, petition for dissolution of marriage. No, she gasped, clutching the papers. You can't. After everything we've shared. Daniel's voice was steady, colder than she had ever known it. You ended our marriage the moment you chose Marcus. I'm only putting it on paper. Clara's eyes darted between him and his mother, desperate for mercy. Evelyn, please, talk to him. Tell him not to ruin us like this. Evelyn's gaze was unflinching, her voice firm. You ruined yourself, Clara. My son deserves better than lies and betrayal. Clara broke down, sobbing into her hands. It was a mistake, I was lonely, Daniel. You worked late, you were never here, and Marcus, he was there. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes burning into hers. Lonely? You could have spoken to me. Instead, you plotted to let me raise a child that wasn't mine, while you laughed with him about it. That's not loneliness, Clara. That's cruelty. Her sobs deepened, shaking her whole body. For the first time, Clara felt the true weight of what she had lost. Not just her husband, but the respect of everyone who had once admired her. Daniel stood, gathering his briefcase. You'll have nothing from me. I've moved our assets into accounts you can't touch. You'll leave this marriage with exactly what you came with, nothing. Clara's head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. You can't do that. I have rights. Daniel's voice cut like a blade. Not when there's a prenup. Signed the day before our wedding. Do you remember? You thought it was a formality. Now it's your reality. The color drained from her face. The final illusion shattered. Daniel turned to his mother. "Let's go, Mom." Evelyn rose, her eyes softening as she placed a hand on his arm. Together, they walked toward the door, leaving Clara alone in the wreckage of her lies. The stack of divorce papers lay on the table in front of her, a silent verdict. For the first time, Clara realized the truth. She hadn't just lost Daniel, she had destroyed the only life she'd ever truly had. Weeks passed, but the fallout from that night lingered like smoke after a fire. Daniel's life shifted quietly yet powerfully. He poured his energy into his work, taking on projects that kept his mind sharp and his reputation intact. Clients admired his professionalism, never guessing the storm he had weathered at home. To the world, he was the same Daniel Whitmore, calm, steady, brilliant. But inside, something had hardened. He was no longer the man who trusted blindly. He had learned the price of betrayal and the strength of silence. Evelyn moved in with him temporarily, cooking dinners, filling the house with warmth. She reminded him, gently, that scars didn't mean weakness. "They mean you survived," she would say, her voice steady. "And surviving makes you stronger." Clara, meanwhile, faced the consequences she never imagined. The story of her betrayal spread quickly, whispers among friends, pitying looks at the market, closed doors where once she had been welcomed. Her parents, embarrassed and heartbroken, distanced themselves. The community that once admired her glow now muttered her name with disdain. She gave birth months later, alone. Marcus had vanished long before, refusing to return her calls, disappearing into his endless pursuit of women and wealth. The child she thought would secure her place instead became the weight that dragged her down. She took odd jobs to pay rent, her once flawless hands raw from labor. At night, when the baby cried, Clara held him close and whispered apologies through her tears, apologies he was too young to understand. She thought often of Daniel, of the home she had destroyed with her own choices. She replayed his final words in the restaurant, "You killed us the moment you chose him." Each time, the memory sliced her deeper. Regret became her constant companion, heavier than the child in her arms. For Daniel, closure came not in watching Clara suffer, but in knowing he had taken back control of his life. He didn't gloat, didn't seek revenge beyond what was necessary. He simply lived. He designed buildings that would outlast storms, structures that stood tall because their foundations were true, everything his marriage had failed to be. One evening, as the sun set behind the skyline he helped shape, Daniel stood on a balcony with his mother beside him. "You know, Mom," he said quietly, "I thought losing Clara would break me. But it didn't. It showed me who I am without her." Evelyn smiled softly. "And who is that?" Daniel turned, his eyes clear, his voice steady. "A man who knows his worth. A man who won't be fooled again." Below them, the city lights flickered on, bright and unyielding. Life moved forward, as it always did. Clara, somewhere across town, rocked her baby in a small, dim apartment, tears slipping down her face. She had everything once: love, security, a future. But she had gambled it for passion and lies. Now, all she had left was the echo of a man's steady voice, reminding her of the truth she couldn't escape. Choices have consequences. And hers had cost her everything.